Hey there, I'm MrLeftTurn and welcome to my favorite race shop. Season 1 of Friendship is Magic. It's hard to believe it's been nearly 6 years since it first premiered, and what a great season it was. We got to meet lovable, relatable, and even adorable characters, go on adventures to new places, and learn valuable lessons of friendship with the main 6. Season 1 definitely helped set the charm, innocence, and tone of the 4th generation of MLP, but the season wasn't completely smooth. Sure, there were a few bumps along the way, but hey, that's okay. It's expected from the first season of any show. Everything is still being plotted out and characters are going through first wave development. Not everything was perfect, but those little imperfections have a certain charm to them after so many years. However, despite there being a forgiveness for it being the first season, there was one episode in particular that there is just no defense of it being a first season oddity. Now keep in mind that this is just my silly opinion, and if you disagree, that's cool. But the episode I'm talking about, which is my personal least favorite of Friendship is Magic Season 1, is Over a Barrel. Now, I binged the first 4 seasons of the show on Netflix back when I first became a fan, but even back then I had a very hard time sitting through Over a Barrel. The excitement of not only going to a new location in Equestria, but meeting another member of Applejack's family was squashed by the characters either being completely annoying or out of character. Even for season 1 is very off-putting. One of the worst musical numbers in the show's history, a simple solution that gets purposely overlooked, a few scenes that serve no purpose, and just an overall dull story. The first clue that something was not right with Over a Barrel is sadly the very first scene of the episode. Applejack giving special treatment to an apple tree is understandable, but having her tuck it in and read it a bedtime story is just stupid. I get that the writers wanted to prove how overprotective AJ was of this tree, but the way she goes about it is something I'd expect more out of Pinkie Pie. If the writers wanted to show how overboard Applejack was with the apple tree, why not have her parody people with baseball card collections or comic book collections? Have her freak out if a character touches a leaf the wrong way or heck, even breathes on it wrong. Have Applejack shove them away and straighten the leaf out or dust the tree off shouting, "Eyes only," and mutter to herself there, good as new. This way, having her be overprotective of her apple tree is more believable, and it can be appreciated by people who know how stressful it can be to keep something in mint condition. I get it, apple trees are very important to her family's livelihood, and it's important to her extended family in Appaloosa, but having AJ read it a bedtime story, tuck it in bed, and talk to it like a baby is just creepy. And then we get the pleasurable sound of Rarity whining. That's a great way to end this opening scene. Luckily, the next scene starts off much better than the opening scene, with both Spike and Rarity clearly annoyed with everyone else not shutting up. While yes, they both had a right to complain, I'm glad it was Spike who was the more vocal one about trying to get to sleep, since we already ended the last scene with Rarity whining. And I had a fairly good laugh when Spike burnt the rest of Rainbow's popcorn when she said some of the kernels weren't popped and one of them ends up hitting her in the eye. It's a funny way to show Spike and Rarity are getting fed up. And even though Rainbow and Pinkie aren't done talking after Twilight declares lights out, this scene doesn't drag on for too long. It seems that it will, with Twilight and Fluttershy joining in the conversation, all because Rainbow compared Fluttershy to a tree for some reason. The conversation wasn't that amusing, but it ended perfectly with Rarity scaring the living hell out of everyone.
Could you all be quiet now?
And it was necessary to explain why Spike slept in the same car as Applejack's tree. And then we're treated to a really intense and entertaining action sequence between the Buffalo and Rainbow Dash. It was a nice and fast-paced scene, and it was pretty tense with the buffalo herd ramming into the train and Little Strongheart hijacking the caboose with Spike inside. Plus, the scene even ends with a pretty good gag of Rainbow Dash slamming face first into a railroad sign which splits everyone up. But after that action-packed scene, we arrive in Appaloosa where the episode is completely stolen. The energy and enthusiasm radiating off Brayburn is really the highlight of the entire story. The way he ardently shouts Appaloosa while rearing up on his hind legs and whinnying may understandably annoy some people, but I honestly found his positive attitude and love for his town fairly enjoyable. In fact, the way he goes about proudly showing off Appaloosa to his cousin and her friends was paced to near perfection, including the short humorous moments before moving on to the next site of Appaloosa. It was a nice and quick way to introduce the town so we can get right back to the story, which makes Appaloosa a site I'd love to see more often in MLP. But the scene kept topping itself with giving Brayburn one of the most memorable and humorous faces in the entire series. His expression when Fluttershy mentioned the buffalo made it look like he'd just been told a dirty secret. And the fact that he holds it with his eyes twitching for nearly 10 seconds while AJ, Fluttershy, Twilight, and Rarity were shouting at him was what really made it funny. And here's where the main plot of the episode kicks off, with a land dispute between the buffalo and settler ponies over the planting of the settlers' apple trees. And since the settler ponies need the trees in order to survive, they have a pretty good reason for wanting to leave them up. But what about the buffalo tribe side of the story? Well, I can certainly say that I laughed when Pinkie scared Rainbow Dash out in the desert, which makes me wonder when Pinkie bailed from the train as well. It's just Pinkie being Pinkie. It's better not to think about it. And I did find it somewhat amusing that Spike was buddy-buddy with the buffalo tribe, so he was never in any real danger. Though it's never explained why the tribe respects dragons. I mean, do they see dragons as some sort of important spirit creature? Or do they respect them out of fear? I understand if they felt bad about accidentally dragon napping him, but just a little short explanation would have been nice. I will say though, the buffalo scene after we're introduced to Brayburn is just a little slow, but not too bad. They're good for developing the relationship between Rainbow, Spike, Pinkie, and the buffalo, and for giving the tribe's side of the story about the apple orchard. However, it does strike me as odd that since Spike is an honored guest, that Chief Thunderhooves wasn't there to greet Pinkie and Rainbow Dash and welcome Spike back to the tribe, especially after a successful heist of a pony train. Little Strongheart even explains to them why they stole the tree, and even though Rainbow doesn't trust her, if Chief Thunderhooves was already there, he could have confirmed the story and even shown how distrustful he was of ponies, which also could have proven to Rainbow Dash that the buffalo were telling the truth, rather than having Chief Thunderhooves repeat the same thing just a few minutes later. As for the reason to steal the tree, there's no argument. They have a legitimate complaint about the settler ponies planting the trees on their land. Though I did find it really cringing how they had Chief not only repeat what Little Strongheart already explained, but to go on and on about his father before him and his father before him, when he already said a few seconds before that the land had been theirs for generations. Again, that's all the explanation that was needed for why they were upset with the settler ponies. I get that the writers were going for a joke, especially with how bored to death all the other buffalo looked, but it was unnecessary and not funny at all. Thankfully, Little Strongheart got him to stop, but again, there was no reason for him to even go that far. The only funny thing in this scene is Rainbow Dash getting huffy and crossing her forelegs like an angry 5-year-old. Though it was pretty awesome how she flew up and landed like Iron Man when the buffalo won her trust. And now that the buffalo and settler ponies have established their sides of the conflict, both of which have good arguments I might add, just how will they settle it? Well, let's take a look. The whole dispute within the episode hinges on the fact that the settler ponies and buffalo haven't discussed their reasons for either leaving the apple trees or removing them. Fair enough, miscommunication is an honest mistake. However, when Little Strongheart and Brayburn are brought together to discuss what they can do, this is the beginning of the downward spiral for the episode. Over a Barrel takes a massive nosedive from just meh to bad here. A nosedive that it never recovers from, which in turn makes it my least favorite episode of Season 1. When Little Strongheart and Bray finally get together to fairly converse about their reasons, the conflict of the episode gets drug out by Applejack and Rainbow suddenly deciding they have to speak for the settler ponies and the buffalo without giving Little Strongheart and Bray a chance to talk. The two were ready to speak diplomatically and peacefully for the benefit of both their settlements, yet Rainbow Dash and Applejack act like it's all of a sudden their duty to be advisors to the buffalo and the settler ponies. While their constant interruptions do get really aggravating, Twilight once again becomes the voice of the group and lays it out that both Little Strongheart and Brayburn have good reasons to use the land. So this little riffraff between Applejack and Rainbow was just overheated passions for helping their friend and cousin. Okay, disagreements, no matter how heated, between friends happen all the time. But now Twilight can allow Little Strongheart and Bray a chance to speak, right? Well, Twilight's moment of becoming the voice of reason was completely useless. She gets Rainbow and AJ to shut up, thankfully, but then she doesn't go with the obvious solution of allowing the ones dealing with the conflict to work it out. No, instead she sits there having to analyze what to do for no reason other than to make sure the episode gets to 22 minutes airtime. If she wanted to try and come up with a solution to help, that's perfectly reasonable, but why not leave Little Strongheart and Brayburn alone for an allotted time? They were both eager to exchange information, and I think they could have come up with an idea too. But because of Twilight becoming oblivious, Pinkie Pie gets an idea. As for Pinkie's idea, I have no problem calling it one of the absolute worst songs in the entire show. I don't really care if it was meant to be bad, but it definitely doesn't fall into the so bad it's good category for me. Luckily, the other characters, minus Spike, despise her performance and think it's one of the worst things they've ever seen as well. But the audience shouldn't have to endure the pain too. And while I did find it funny that Sheriff Silverstar and Chief Thunderhooves came to an agreement about Pinkie's song and dance, it really did nothing at all. The tensions between the buffalo and the settler ponies didn't worsen or lessen, they stayed the exact same. So what was the point? Hey, does anyone want to try that talking thing again? Anyone?
Our stampede will start at high noon tomorrow.
No? Alright, drag the runtime out then. While Applejack and Rainbow's bickering, Twilight speaking up with nothing to say, and Pinkie's abomination of a scene were bad, one thing bothered me about this episode more than the 3 previously mentioned moments. Chief Thunderhooves declares that the buffalo shall stampede at high noon the next day. He doesn't vaguely say tomorrow, he gives the Appaloosans a fair warning about the exact time if the trees are not cut down. Bottom line, the Appaloosans, the main 6, and Spike all knew precisely when the buffalo would return. So why didn't Brayburn and Little Strongheart use the time they had to their advantage to negotiate? Okay, fine, they had to help their respective settlements prepare for the confrontation so things wouldn't look suspicious. However, how easy could it have been for Bray to take Spike aside at night and have the dragon lead him to buffalo territory so he can secretly meet with Little Strongheart? They were rather eager to gather information from one another to benefit both of them, and now all of a sudden there's no time to talk? I'm not saying that if they did get a chance to covertly talk in the middle of the night, that the conflict would be over. No, with the friction between the buffalo and settler ponies, one talk wouldn't be enough for everyone on both sides to listen, especially with how Chief Thunderhooves and Sheriff Silverstar literally butted heads earlier. At least it would have been a step in the right direction, and maybe both Little Strongheart and Brayburn could have sabotaged the attack on both sides, which easily could have led to a misunderstanding, thus raising the tensions to a boiling point, or they could have removed the trees themselves overnight. This would seem to solve the problem at first, but more than likely the Appaloosans could understandably accuse the buffalo of tearing down their livelihood and then declare war on the buffalo. At least then the events leading up to the battle would have been far more interesting instead of boring montages of both sides preparing for a fight. And not only that, but then the bickering between Applejack and Rainbow, Twilight speaking up with nothing to say, and Pinkie's awful scene would actually serve a purpose beyond padding out the runtime. With their chances to talk constantly being interrupted, Brayburn and Little Strongheart could easily get aggravated to the point where they just need to get away from their friends and meet up to talk to one another since their friends have a hard time listening to them every time they begin to converse.
If we could just sit down and talk, we could... Why won't anybody be rational and reasonable?
Oh, now you want to sit down and talk rationally. Yeah, where was that a few minutes ago when you had important figures from the buffalo and settler ponies, Twilight? But putting all that aside, it's time for the buffalo and Appaloosans to fight. Maybe. It appears that Chief Thunderhooves is seriously considering ending the fight before it even starts so they can move along diplomatically.
Say, you gotta share, you gotta care.
No, please, hearing it once was enough. Oh yeah. Thanks for making things worse by pissing off the chief, Pinkie. Thanks a lot. I know Pinkie isn't one to give up like the Cranky Doodle Donkey episode proved, but since her first performance was panned by everyone, what makes her think doing it a second time will suddenly make it work? Oh well, at least the buffalo shut her up. And what do you know, we actually get another pretty good action scene. Before I sat down to study this episode for this video, I remembered not liking the Pie War at all and thought that it was really stupid. I mean, Pie's stopping 1,400-pound charging buffalo. But then I remembered that it's a cartoon, so that made it much easier to enjoy. And in fact, we even get an homage to a Bugs Bunny cartoon with the settler ponies hiding an anvil behind a bale of hay for the buffalo to run into. And then, of course, Chief Thunderhooves gets hit, tastes the pies that the Appaloosans made, and decides to strike a deal with the settler ponies that both sides are happy and content with. We also get the classic closing monologue of Twilight writing to Celestia about the lesson everyone learned in Appaloosa about sharing and caring with one another.
Hey! That's what I said!
Yeah, don't remind me of that. And that was Over a Barrel. So, after all that, it's easy to see why this is my least favorite episode of Friendship is Magic Season 1. I will give the episode credit that there were a few good moments. The 2 action sequences we got at the beginning of the episode and the end of the episode were well animated and entertaining. Brayburn was the star of the episode for me and makes me wish he would get a little more attention in the show since he's such a positive guy. Sheriff Silverstar and Chief Thunderhooves agreeing that Pinky's act was the worst thing they'd ever seen, and you can't go wrong with paying tribute to a Bugs Bunny joke. Unfortunately, these are nowhere near good enough to help Over a Barrel claw its way up to even just a meh rating. As I stated before, the whole episode is just crushed by characters being either completely annoying or out of character just to tell a joke, one of the worst musical numbers in the show's history, a simple solution that was ignored so the episode could reach a minimum of 22 minutes, a cringing opening scene, and just an overall dull story. Beyond Brayburn's introduction, nothing that interesting happens even in the first half of the episode, and the second half is just aggravating to watch minus the pie war. As for the moral at the end of the episode, I would add that listening should be a part of the message. In order to share or care with others, you first have to listen to their side to understand what they want. I add this mainly because listening is a lesson that the main 6 definitely needed to learn from this episode. They tried but one time to get Brayburn and Little Strongheart to listen and talk, but after that, the main 6, mainly Rainbow, AJ, Twilight, and Pinky, make things worse. Over a Barrel, you won't be riding off into the sunset. So that's my opinion on Over a Barrel. Obviously, I didn't like it, but what's your opinion on the episode? Do you agree that it's the worst Season 1 has to offer? Do you think it's one of the best of Season 1? Or do you think another episode takes the title of the worst episode of Season 1? Please post your thoughts on Over a Barrel in the comments below. I'm Mr. Left Turn. I'll see you the next time I get back from the track.